Today's episode is with Melissa Esmeralda, who is a rugby player who maybe had her eyes on law school. She was a paralegal for 8 years, but then she decided to actually take her talents and her skills. And then she was like, actually, I'm good at writing. I'm good at this part of it. And she started a business called the MEO Marketing Group, conversion copywriter for coaches and course creators. So your expertise are creating like sales pages, landing pages, launch copy, websites, email marketing, all the things that take a lot of time that a lot of, if there's business owners listening like me, I actually hate this part of business. And so it's amazing that there's people like you out there that are good at what you do and that you like to be able to help and support people in their business. I love when there's businesses that support other businesses, right? So it's like, you're not maybe the star of the show out in front, but you are giving an opportunity for people to get their businesses out as a star out in front and really getting the traffic and the traction and the attention that they need to be successful. So that's really, really cool. I'm excited to hear more about that, how you kind of got into that. And also like, what else should the listeners know about you?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Copywriting is kind of one of those weird industries that every business could use one, but they might not know what a copywriter is.
Yeah.
Copywriting essentially is writing in a way, and this is how it differs from content writing. It's to persuade an action. So it's to sell a product, sell a course. You can use copywriting to be informative as well. But one thing about copywriters, most of us are pretty introverted, so we don't care about taking the credit.
Yeah.
We just love doing like the writing portion, but the writing portion, to be honest, it's kind of a smaller part of it because you do a lot of research, there's a lot of psychology that goes into it because you're not just kind of writing blindly. You really want to get to know your client well and figure out what exactly makes them stand out, what makes them so unique, like why do your clients love you, and then inject that into the copy. And that one thing too is that a lot of my clients will tell me like, oh, I'm not a good writer. Like, I don't know what to say. But if you listen to them long enough, they have really good snippets that go into the copy. And it's so much fun seeing their faces light up. They're like, oh, okay, that sounds really great. But like, it's really not me. Like it's coming from them. You're just kind of expanding on it a little bit. So that's one of my favorite parts of it.
That's really cool. So you like listen to your clients, watch your clients, and you take the real valuable things that they say and turn them into these landing pages or the launch copy or the website. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I think that it does take a real talent and gift. And obviously also like the knowledge that you have from learning. You mentioned to me that you took a course on how to, become a copywriter. And so you get to use that talent and like, and help people in their businesses and create real clarity in their offerings, which I think a lot of businesses, that's what they're lacking. They maybe have great services, great products, but explaining how or why or what it is can be kind of it's doing it right. It's a hard thing to get really good at, but there's people like you who are really good at it. So that's awesome. So you live in Arizona, right? And you launched your business about a year ago.
Yeah, I actually ended up quitting my job on my birthday, which wasn't on purpose, but it was really cool that it turned out that way. So I've been in business like about, I want to say like a year and a half or so. And like I was mentioning earlier, I wasn't fulfilled before. Being a paralegal is a really high stress job. Normally not a whole lot of money. There's a lot of turnover. So I knew I needed a change. Like I didn't like anything that was going on in my life. And I got a Facebook ad for copywriting. And I was like, well, I don't know what this is, but it involves writing. So let me take a look at it. And once I started going through the course, learning the techniques, it didn't seem out of reach and it didn't necessarily seem difficult, but it was still something new at the same time because a lot of copywriting involves storytelling. And I've written a ton of fiction, like growing up in my life because I was an only child for 9 years. So like,
oh, wow.
If I wasn't playing sports, like I was writing something down.
Yeah.
So it didn't feel like a huge leap. It is very overwhelming in the beginning, as you know, because there's so much that you need to know, but you just don't know yet. And like, you don't know what's going to cost you money. Like you don't know how to advertise. You don't know how to write your own stuff, but like so has been a lot of like trial and error, but like, especially the last, probably like 4 or 5 months, I'm really excited about the direction I'm going in, just because like you said, like if you don't have the clarity and you don't know how to describe your offer, so like nobody's gonna understand what you do. And it's actually one of the biggest reasons why people leave a website is they don't understand what the business
Mm-hmm.
does. And that's something that I'm working on with one of my clients right now because he has incredible offers. But the top part, like the fold copy in his website, just doesn't accurately say what he does. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's why he has a high bounce rate. And like he's a great client, really easy to work with. So like I told him, like, I want people to know exactly what you do when they come to your website, because otherwise, how are they going to know what you can do for them and like how you can change their lives?
Yeah. And I think also a big mistake that we tend to make when we're putting our website out there or even like on social media is like, it's all about us, right? It's like, here
Mm-hmm.
I am. This is what I do. This is how good I am. These are all my, achievements. This is how smart I am. And people read it and they're like, congratulations. Like, do you want a trophy or right? But when really they should be visiting our website or visiting our social media and they should be learning who we are and what we do helps them,
Mm-hmm.
like what
Yeah.
we actually can do for them, right? And so I make up that what the writing that you do turns it back, like, here is how we can help you. This is what this product or this service is going to do for you.
Yeah.
And that there's a big difference in that, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the biggest mistakes that people do. They do it by accident because, like
Right.
it is your business, like you're offering these things, especially if you're a solopreneur, you only have one offer or product. So it's really easy to be like, okay, this is what I do. Come and check this out. But you do have to write in a certain way that it is talking to your target audience. It makes them connect with them. And it doesn't have to sound super salesy. It doesn't have to feel weird or gross. It does feel weird to promote yourself in general, but if you do it in a way that is connecting to your ideal audience, like you want people to read your stuff, like read your website, read your content, your social media posts, and think, oh, she really gets me. Like I really want to
Mm-hmm.
work with her, because you are a lot more than a business. Like you're also a brand, you're also a person, but people want to get to know you a little bit more on a deeper level, because that's how they end up turning into repeat or lifelong customers, which is the end goal for a lot of people.
Right. And I also think as a business owner, or someone who's offering services, it actually isn't about you promoting yourself. It's about you knowing your value that you have. It's knowing how great your product or your service is and really wanting to reach the people who can benefit from it. So it's actually not even about you. It's about them. It's about, and I think it's a lot easier to show up and to share and to promote when you
Mm-hmm.
recognize that shift, that it's not actually about you, it's about them and how you can help them and how you can serve them and how your life or your business would have been significantly better and or easier if you would have had these resources that you're offering them.
Yeah, exactly. You want to display the transformation that you can provide for them. So then
Yeah.
they realize, like, okay, I have to do this now. Otherwise, my life is just going to stay the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned transformation because as we were talking before we started recording, you mentioned to me that how old were you when you had a friend that spoke some pretty powerful words to you? How old were you?
I was like 19 or 20 years old. I was a baby.
Okay, so she was like 19 or 20 years old, and at that point, your life kind of looked like what?
It was no, actually, I might have been a little bit older, but it was like early 20s. But I don't remember what he and I were talking about. My friend told me, you live your life like you're in the passenger seat. And at first I was slightly offended, probably because of whatever
Mm-hmm.
we were talking about. But then I really thought about it and I realized, yeah, he was right. Like I just kind of acted like I had no control over anything. Like I couldn't make any decisions. Not that I didn't want to, but I learned from a young age that a lot of times what I had to say didn't matter. If someone else had, I guess, like a stronger voice, or they just had
Mm-hmm.
like more authority or whatever that it was. But it's something that really resonated with me because for so long I really felt like almost like my life was written for me in a way, even though I didn't know what the words were.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that that's really something that people can relate to. There's actually a quote that says something along the lines of like, the truth is going to hurt at first and make you angry, but it's also what will set you free. And so I think it's really cool that your friend was able to notice a pattern that was kind of going on in your life and see that the reason why you were maybe feeling frustrated or, whatever it was that you were feeling at that point, like being in the passenger seat it was obvious that he could notice that maybe you were feeling defeated, maybe you were feeling confused, maybe you're feeling depressed, like whatever it was. And he was
Mhm.
willing to speak up and say like, listen, you're sitting in the driver's seat, you're letting life happen to you, you're just going with the flow. And it is true that as like children and as we're growing up, we kind of start believing what is around us, right? So our experiences tell us that this is the truth. And it's our responsibility as we grow and we start paying attention to what life actually is to notice and to make changes that don't feel good to us anymore. And so sometimes that comes in the form of someone else speaking that truth to us. And sometimes we have to discover it like on our own. I always am so grateful for friends who are willing to be like a worse best friend in the moment. You know, you mentioned that it kind of hurt you. At first you were just like, ew, like, what do you mean? Like, no, I drive my own car. I am the boss of my life. Right.
Yeah.
We all get a little bit offended, but a worse best friend is someone who he told you that not to tell you that you were, like not capable of being a driver of your car, but he told you that because he could tell that you were no longer wanting to be a passenger, or that the passenger seat was actually doing more harm than good. And so he was like inviting you into your own power. So after the initial, like, that was rude, I didn't like that you just said that to me. I would love to hear kind of what that processing was like for you and the discovery that came from it.
It definitely took longer than it should have, just because you kind of go into I mean, I think anyone who's been through any type of traumatic experience understands that there is kind of like a grieving process almost, where you're like, okay, well, I'm not how I was before, but I don't want to accept what happened to me. So you just kind of get in this really weird, like, negative state. So, and that's exactly where I was at the time. So I was like, well, okay, like, I don't want to talk about any of the things that happened to me, because then I have to admit that those things happen, and then I have to do things to overcome it. And like, I just kind of want to skip a couple of steps, but like, I realized that I just couldn't. Like, I had to accept what had happened to me, and I had to grow and heal and move on from there, because I had zero self-esteem. And it affected me like in everything I did. Like, I was just extremely shy, very nervous around everybody. Like, I didn't want to go anywhere. And I am still very introverted now, but like, I do not consider myself shy. People do get my personality confused every once in a while, because they think I'm upset, and I tell them, no, I'm not upset. Like, I'm okay, like, being at a party and like not talking to anybody. I know that sounds really weird.
No, that's okay.
It's not an insecurity thing. Like, if there's snacks, I'm gonna go to the snacks.
Yeah.
Enjoy my time there. But it definitely took me, I want to say, about a year or so to realize, well, okay, like, I need some help. Like, I think I need to go to therapy, because I didn't know how to find the solutions by myself. But
you were lacking like that self-trust.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I just didn't trust myself, and I was just like so skeptical of everybody. And it's frustrating having that battle. Like, okay, should I trust my instincts and think everybody's bad, or should I give people a chance, even though this feels uncomfortable? So I really needed to learn how to navigate through those things.
Okay, I think that's something that we can all relate to in one way or another. Are those times when we question whether it's like our intuition telling us that we can listen to, or if it's the fear from past experiences that's coming and speaking to us. So how are you able to distinguish the difference?
It took some time. It took a lot of work and like questioning myself and like trying to unbreak a lot of patterns. But a lot of it is I'm not an impulsive person, because I do not want to make the wrong choice. So I really have to weigh the pros and cons. It can be in anything, like in dating, for example. I have to get to know someone a little bit better before I decide whatever direction I want to head into, because they're still a stranger to you, and there's always that chance, like, oh, what if they're like hiding their true intentions? What if they're actually a bad person? That could be for anything, like not just for dating, but you just have to be not quite hyper vigilant, but try not to psych yourself out of anything. Sometimes people are good people and they do have good intentions, but you are so used to the negative experiences that you shouldn't write people off or write opportunities off right away just because you've had so many bad experiences. That doesn't mean they're going to keep happening to you. It just takes some practice, basically, to talk to yourself and be like, okay, this isn't what it feels like. I have to be a little bit more logical about it.
Yeah. Well, or like the logic could also be the part that's proving to you, or that it's telling you, you're like, logically, this has happened to me, this, and this. So that just must be what happens. But I also do think like your intuition is kind of how the inner trust that happens, that kind of like speaks to us like, okay, yes, it is true that this happened, but it's also true that you're wanting to experience things differently, that you're actually wanting to trust people. And I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of peace of mind, maybe some clarity, to see where and when you can trust and maybe when you can't. Did you find that to be true?
Yeah, definitely. In a way, you're kind of feel like your intuition is not quite broken, but it just needs a little bit of repairing, which is why there's a lot of it. It almost feels like conflicting evidence, because like your gut is telling you bad things, but like logically, you're like, well, nothing bad has happened. So you're kind of at odds with yourself all the time. But like it does get easier over time, because a lot of it can end up being like self-sabotage in a way. I wasn't necessarily a self-sabotager, but I know that is very common, because you immediately want to trust your gut instinct, but it could be that your gut instinct is just a little bit skewed. So it just takes a little bit of time to be able to differentiate what is actually going on and what you're afraid is going to happen.
And I kind of picture that like fear, right? So our fear, I think that when we step into fear is typically when we go into the driver's seat, or I mean to the passenger seat, sorry. Like I think that fear lives in the passenger seat. And so you mentioned that you had been in the passenger seat. And like, I don't think that when we're in the driver's seat, I think we could have feelings of fear, but we're not stuck in that fear and allowing fear to make the decisions, right? So I think if you find yourself and and the fear is like all consuming, and you're making all your decisions out of that fear, that's when we're like, okay, here I am in the passenger seat and I'm letting this drive my car and it feels out of control, right? What other feelings would you associate with being in the passenger seat?
Lack of control, just so many unknowns, because since you feel like you're already not in control and everything just kind of feels kind of chaotic, it's almost like you're tensed up waiting for something bad to happen. And then if something bad does happen, you put something in your community, you're like, oh yeah, well, I knew that was going to happen.
Right.
So just it's this cycle of such negative self-talk that really it's bad for you, but it does take a lot of time and a lot of effort to get yourself out of that, because it's okay to have fear, but you shouldn't right away feel like you're paralyzed from it, because otherwise, like if you're not slightly scared to do things, whether it's a new goal or starting a new business, there will be some fear there, but that's also growth and change happen.
Yeah. And fear can be a motivator, right? Like fear can be something that like gives you the adrenaline and the excitement. And actually I had a big speaking engagement coming up, and the night before I left, one of my daughters, she's 14, she was like, are you afraid or do you feel scared? And I was like, yeah, for sure. And she's like, cool, that means that it's important to you. And so I loved that she shared that with me. Like, yeah, like when something is important to us, like, of course, we're going to feel a little nervous. It's a big deal. Like we have desired outcomes. We want the experience to be a certain way. But I picture the fear that is maybe that driving our car is the one that is kind of like a wheel. We're just like on this wheel or this spiral. And, but fear can be on a path. And the important thing is to say like, okay, am I on a path, or am I like on this like wheel or this spiral? And that helps me kind of distinguish the difference between like a healthy fear that's like just normal and natural. And it's kind of has me on like high alert a little bit, but it also could be excitement, or the fear of the spiral, this thing, it's like patterns repeating itself, me not making decisions clearly, right? It's just a distraction from what's actually going on.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. It ends up being a distraction, because you know that there is a part of you that wants to get ahead, wants to go through this fear and be able to change and be able to grow. But at the same time, it's so easy to just do whatever it is that you've been doing. And everybody falls back into patterns every once in a while. But as long as you recognize it and you're like, oh wait, I'm being my own problem and I'm getting in my own way. Like nobody's going to fix this for me. Like I have to go ahead and tell myself like, yeah, it's scary, but I'm going to learn something from it, whether it goes the way I wanted to or not. But you can't really expect to have any growth if you're letting yourself stay in the same position because you're just going to end up staying on that same cycle and on that same path.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there you are. You're feeling not super fulfilled in the work that you were doing as a paralegal, and the Facebook ad comes up and you're like, "Oh, I'm actually good at writing." And so you decide to take it and you're like, "Okay, actually, I think I could do this." And that's like, I visualize you getting from the passenger seat. You could have stayed in there comfortably. Maybe you would have went some cool places, right? But you were like, "No, I actually want to go in a direction that feels really good and fulfilling to me in my life." So in that moment, I see you getting over into the driver's seat and you're like, "Okay, here we go." And what has that looked like for you?
It was overall, it has been great, but at the same time, like you can be in your driver's seat, like trying to make all these big changes, but life still happens.
Yeah.
And
You're
there's
still
just so much
responsible for
going.
driving the car, right? The driver's seat doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you don't have to drive anymore. It doesn't mean that it's like set for you. It's like, okay, now you actually know and you want to take ownership and responsibility for your life.
Yeah. And like as exciting as it is initially, like life is still going on and you can't just jump into one thing into the other. Like I couldn't just quit my job right away and like go into copywriting. I was
Yeah.
working ton of hours. I was in the middle of moving. I had a bunch of other things going on. So like it feels out of reach in a way. And then like it is kind of scary, but I was just so excited to just keep moving forward with it. So once I finally did quit my job, I ended up quitting at that time because my biggest retainer client at the time, they promised me more work, which would replace my income. So then I quit my job all excited on my birthday. Then a couple weeks go by and I don't hear anything from them. So I emailed them and they told me that the company sold. So I had
Yeah.
nothing. I was like, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
what do I do? And that was like my first big lesson in business ownership,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Because like I did want to it's taking the leap into starting your own business is one thing, but then when you're trying to quit your job and to do the business full time is another
Mm-hmm.
really big step.
Yeah.
So I am glad that I did do it, but the first couple of months after that, it was really stressful because like even though like I had money saved up and everything, it feels like you start off failing in a way.
Mm.
So you kind of have to look at it. Well, there's only one way I can go, and that's up, and it is overwhelming because I was so new to business ownership at the time. But I ended up learning a lot. Like I learned a lot
Right.
about myself. And like I mentioned earlier, like all the lessons that I've taken from rugby that has helped me a lot in business, which really surprised me because they sound like they don't have anything in common.
No,
But it's like a
I've
lot.
actually, yeah, a lot of people have mentioned that.
Yeah, it's like a lot of resilience and like a lot of mental toughness. So like I think that has helped me out a lot because especially since like I now have the self-confidence. I've never thought like, oh, I'm not good enough to do this. Like I can't be successful because of X, Y, and Z. It's always more of a frustration. Like I know I can do this, but like I don't know what I need. I don't know yet in order to get to like whatever my next goal is. So it's a constant learning path, which
Yes.
I really love.
Yeah.
But business ownership is just like it's very new territory for everybody because it's not going to look the same for two people.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. And also you mentioned that, so you had this promise from this client, and then that gave you the courage to quit your job, and then that client disappeared and you had already quit your job. So now you're like, "Oh no, this is horrible. This is like the worst case scenario." But really, if you look at it a different perspective, it's like best case scenario. They gave you the courage to quit your job, right? And it feels like failure when you first start something and you're like in the negative, but it's also like the slingshot. It's like it has to go back, and then it propels forward. And so I think that's a really valuable lesson too for anyone listening, is that sometimes when it feels like we're going backwards, it's because we're preparing ourselves to go forward. And sometimes when like those lessons, when you probably felt some intense urgency in those moments to like, okay, what do I got to figure out? Now I actually have to fight for what I want because there's like not this promise of this client here. And I honestly think that creates the strongest type of entrepreneur when they fight for what they actually want. And there is that urgency, kind of that fire under their butt, like, all right, we got to move, like we're going to make this work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like it was a big shock, but also like having the time to do all the work that you need to do in your
Yeah.
business. Like that was life changing in itself, whether
Mm-hmm.
the company didn't sell or not, because there's only so much you can do when you're working
Yeah.
10 hours a day, trying to go to the gym and then trying to work on your business at night. And I don't have any kids. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know how parents do it when they're staying up
Mm-hmm.
really late, just putting in like a couple hours of work every day, which is great. But once you have the freedom to be able to work full time and grow from there, it's so much easier. But at the same time, there's still that sense of urgency. Well, like if I don't do these things right, I'm not going to go anywhere in a couple of
Yeah.
months. But it ended up, like you said, ended up being a really great thing, because otherwise I don't know when I would have quit my job.
Yeah. And I always say, in order to create something, you have to create space. If there's not space in order to grow something, like it's not going to grow. And so you kind of spoke to that when you said, they gave me the courage to quit my job. And that actually gave me the ability to work on my business because I now had time. I had space in my life to be able to work on the business and make it what I wanted it to be. And so I think that's something that we have to think about, is like, if we're trying to grow something and there's no room for it, chances are it's like not going to grow very well. But
Yeah.
if we want something, then we have to really, truly be honest with ourselves and our circumstance and look around and say, okay, is there space for this thing I want to grow? Or how can I create the space to have time to actually give it the attention and the focus that it needs?
Yeah, you really have to go all in as much as you can, because you have to really take a look at your life and think, okay, well, where can I minimize my expenses and where can I maximize my time? And I had this realization. I was like, okay, well, I can't play rugby full time anymore. And at first it was like the end of my life, because rugby was just what I did for so long in it. But it's extremely time consuming. Like you have practice 2 nights a week, which ends up taking your whole evening. You're gone the whole weekend. I played year round. It's expensive to travel everywhere. So it didn't make sense anyways. But for a while it was almost like an identity crisis. So I was, because in my head I was like, well, I've always been Melissa the rugby player. Like being Melissa the copywriter is like a rebranding in a way.
Like an internal rebrand too, right?
Yeah,
those internal rebrands are sometimes the very hardest, because they do. You're like, will people still like this version of me? Do people like, how will, it's going to take me a long time for people to even know this version of me. But I love to think that you get to take the best of all of the versions of you and continue adding to them. So it's like you're not letting that part go of you. You're just adding that to and going to this next chapter of your story. So that's really cool. So what would you say, looking back at 19 or 20-year-old Melissa riding in the driver's or in the passenger seat? I keep messing that up. But driving in, like riding in the passenger seat and looking like where you are now, like what would you say to her?
I think a lot of things, but generally, I think I would tell her that your thoughts and your opinions and your feelings are valid. And just because someone or people have made you feel like they're not, doesn't mean that they're right. And you will grow into something that will seem like a completely different person, but you will still be yourself at the same time. 'Cause I know that like when we're young adults, like we're so impressionable because we're navigating the world for the first time. But self growth and just like realizing like maybe some of your patterns aren't healthy, or you're not very nice to yourself, if you don't work on those early on, it's gonna be a lot more difficult later. And it's a lot more difficult to have fulfilling relationships with other people if you don't even like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. That's so beautiful. I love that you shared that. And I love to see the growth that you've been able to experience just by kind of taking control of your own thoughts and your own feelings and your own beliefs about yourself and your own business. That's so cool, so inspiring. Also, while she's talking, if you're just listening, you're not gonna be able to see this, but like we share dimples.
Yeah, I didn't even realize I had these. Like I hardly ever see them anybody else.
Yeah, I hardly ever see them on other people too. A couple of my siblings have them, and like one of my daughters has them. But we share the same dimples, like on both sides of our chin. They're like just these little tiny things. Oh, that's so fun! I love it. You were talking, and I was like, oh look, like we share dimples. That's so fun. But anyways, Melissa, I appreciate you so much sharing this, and I think that it will be really inspiring for anyone who maybe feels like that. Maybe they're stuck in those old patterns or beliefs, or thoughts of inadequacy, or just allowing life to kind of take them wherever it takes them. And and it takes courage, and it takes trust, and it takes like hard work to really take ownership of your life. But honestly, that's where the freedom of becoming exactly who you're meant to be, and that love and the passion and the fulfillment, like that's where it is when we are meant to be the drivers of our own cars. So I love that message so much. And where can the listeners find you?
They can find me on Instagram or on my website. My website is meomarketinggroup.com. And then I'm also on Instagram at same thing, meomarketinggroup.com.
Amazing. And to close the interview, a quote that's really a thought that's very important to me is this: fire in her heart, peace in her soul. And it came to me when I was like trying to figure out what the women that I was coaching really needed. And that's what came to me, just this idea that we have something that's lighting us up, that is that fulfilling passion, purpose-filled work that we're doing. And that can be anywhere. That can be in our homes, that can be a job, that can be on ourselves, right? But also I realized that a lot of us spend a lot of time like with so much passion or so much just to-do list that we actually burn down the village around us. And we also lose that piece that is so important to like have coexisting with our passions. And so I just like to really be mindful of that, making sure that I do have things that are making me excited to get up and get out of bed and keep moving, but also that I am being very intentional about protecting the peace that's inside of me, so that I can feel that, I can share that with other people. I also think in peace is when we have clarity, and we can see the needs of ourselves and for those around us. So what is something that is currently lighting your heart on fire?
Honestly, it's that everything in my life right now is exactly what I had been wanting like since I was a young adult, and I did not think it was something that I could have. Like I never really thought that I would be doing something for a living that like I thoroughly enjoyed.
Yeah.
Like based on like my own schedule, like the projects that I love. But for a very long time, I did not think I could be in a healthy, like fulfilling, like thriving relationship with somebody. And like I know that sounds really cheesy, but like when I first met my boyfriend, like I was talking about earlier, when you don't quite trust yourself, I was like, he is very nice. He's a very good guy. Is this gonna work out? It's like it took a little bit of time for me to trust myself, and he has just been so supportive, and he's such a great person. And I tell him all the time, like it has absolutely changed my life being with him.
That's awesome. And I think too, it's really cool that you can recognize that you're living what you want. A lot of times we have this idea of things that we want, and then once we're in them, then we're still looking forward at the next things that we want. But it's so important for us to notice the progress that we make, or the dreams that come true, or the happiness that we're feeling like in the moment, because otherwise we miss out on everything we've worked for. So I love that you shared that. And what is something that you do to protect the peace of your soul?
I try to ask myself before like I start working on anything, well, is this something like I actually want, or is it just because like when you're new, like with copywriting, for example, you want to take whatever project comes your way. And lately I've turned just a couple like smaller projects down just because I knew they weren't a great fit. And when I first started doing that, like I felt really guilty.
Yeah.
But now like I've had a little bit more practice and I was like, okay, these people just really aren't great clients to work with. Like it's not gonna like turn
Not a good fit for you.
Yeah, they're not a good fit, but that allows me to work on other things that I do really need, whether it's business development or like something for a client, or if I want to like go somewhere for the weekend, like it still allows me to, like I can say no. And that's the final answer. Like I don't necessarily have to explain myself. And that was a really difficult thing for me to learn how to do.
Yeah, it's another level of trust, of self-trust that you have been working on. So that's incredible that you've built up to that place where you actually didn't know if you could trust yourself at all. And now you're trusting yourself to even make big decisions like that. So way to go. That's beautiful. And I do think that when we make decisions that feel right and good to us, that's when we are in alignment, and alignment brings that peace. So thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'm excited for the listeners to hear and to know more about you. I just really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.